Okay, so when you're watching Shark Tank, this is not progressing. Nope. Y'all might do hand puppets while I describe the slides that are coming up.
It's down.
Oh, it's down? Okay. So, since a lot of y'all have watched Shark Tank either here or, virtually or whatever, what do you usually hear as far as what really upsets or that the sharks always complain about when somebody presents? They have 2 or 3 main topics, right? So what do you hear?
EBITDA, revenue, multiple.
Okay, yep, that's good. What else?
No profitability.
No profitability, that's always a big energy suck. What else? Gross margin. But what do the sharks complain about when somebody's presenting?
They don't know their numbers.
Boom. You don't know your numbers. And what they're really saying is you don't know what your numbers are telling you about your own business. And that's really the important part. And that's what we want to get out today. Today, this is a part of a bigger workshop that I do. And today we're only going to focus on the P&L because let's face it, y'all spend 90% of your time on the P&L and not the balance sheet. But we'll talk about that bear trap later on. So, the value of accounting. Have any of y'all read this book, The Road Less Stupid? It's a great book. It's a great book. So it talks about this premise called the dumb tax. And the way the dumb tax works is if you look back over your life, business or otherwise, what would be the most expensive decision that you made, mistake that you made, that you could have avoided if you had done more research, gotten more data, and been better informed? When I've asked that question before, the results are usually anywhere between $50,000 and 7 figures. So my dumb tax was 7 figures. So maybe I'm really dumb and shouldn't be up here on stage, but that is what it is. But one of the other premises is what it says right here. I don't need to do more smart things. I just need to do less dumb things. So we're going to focus on your numbers today, how to better understand your P&L so you can avoid doing more dumb things. And we all do them. I'm not insulting y'all. So when you think about your numbers, very rarely do people think about their people. Because this is a universal premise that I think is true with every company, every financials, no matter what. That your financials are nothing more than a historical reflection of your people, their decisions, behaviors, processes, and systems, right? So hopefully, when you look at your numbers, you can interpolate them to go, what needs to change with my people, decisions, processes, behaviors, etc. Because I don't care how great your strategy is. If you don't know how to change your people and what the numbers are telling you about the changes needed, you're likely not going to achieve your wildest aspirations or your strategy. So as we go through this, I want you to be thinking about how does this align with affecting my people and educating my people about the numbers, because you got to cascade this down ultimately. So when y'all look at your financials, what are the top 3 things that you look at? Revenue. That's usually A. What's B? Profit, EBITDA. Thank you. Gross margin's a good one. Oh gosh, you're doing awesome. You're doing awesome. Most people then say my cash balance, right? My cash balance, revenue, EBITDA, cash balance. Well, congratulations. You probably just looked at 3 of the most misleading things about your business to base a decision on, right? So it's very important to understand that. In fact, this is the universal truth. When I ask that question, these are the 3 answers that come up 90% of the time. Sometimes somebody will say gross margin, sometimes somebody will say cash flow, and sometimes they'll say working capital, but that's rare. These are the 3 things that everybody looks at. And one of the big reasons that CEOs only look at these things is because of this one right here. We literally had a client one time, a great controller. This girl was super smart. She was working remotely. And when she was done with close, she had hit a button and the printer in the CEO's office would start whirring away. And after it finished whirring, there's a stack about 1/4 of an inch thick of paper, analyses, charts, spreadsheets, and everything else. Now, we have a lot of CEOs in this room. Now, how many of y'all have the time to go through a quarter-inch deck of numbers and everything else that aren't explained to you? Right. You don't. You don't. Numbers need to be very apparent to you very quickly, or they need to be explained. Doing a data dump is how accountants talk to accountants. It's not how number preparers should talk to a CEO, because they lose sight of the fact that you need to make a decision out of this. Now, ideally, this is another problem within accounting. Who all saw Ratatouille? Right? So, in Ratatouille, which one is the genius and which one is the fake? The rat's the genius. We call this title inflation sometimes because we've walked into companies where a bookkeeper, Bob the bookkeeper, Bob's been there 20 years, right? And he's loyal, he's hardworking. How do we reward Bob? Well, we give Bob a promotion, a new title, and we give Bob more money. And after several years, Bob's the CFO. But Bob is really still just a really great bookkeeper that knows a ton about your business, but really is not a CFO. So that's why we call it title inflation. We see that at the controller shop too, that we have people that were bookkeepers, great bookkeepers, and now they're called controllers. So this is what your back office should look like. Our controller is on the left. She seems like a very bright lady, but look at her office. It's immaculately and under control. She has her calculator, she has her books. Now, back in the old days, before we did everything, in folders in our computers, all those books, binders behind her, that would be where all of her reconciliations were. If you asked her about, this account or that account, she'd pull it out, flip open the page, there's the reconciliation, here's the explanation. One thing that's very important to understand about your controller, though, is their number one job, it's a manufacturing job, right? They manufacture one thing every month, and it's your financial statements. And when they're done with those financial statements, they're going to go back and get ready to prepare for the next production run. Now, these are really smart people, but because that's their primary focus, they don't often look up to interpret the numbers and give you insight. It's not because they're not smart enough. It's because their primary job is to produce the financials, not give direction and interpretations. Now, the person on the right, that's your CFO. So I want you to think about your CFO, and when you question what do you have in your company, the CFO is really the navigator for your business. So you're taking off from Dallas and you want to go to Seattle. Well, the CFO is going to make sure you have enough fuel, the right people are in the right place. They're going to make sure that they have a path around the storm that's currently over Denver. So they are your navigational partner. They should also be very well attuned with what the numbers are telling them, because they are also what I would call your chief financial education officer, as well as just your CFO. They're meant to talk to you and not just the bank or the insurance company. Hopefully that makes sense, because we all have different gifts. Your gifts are radically different from mine, but your company is better the more you have complementary gifts instead of redundant gifts. So today we're going to focus on the income statement. And how much time do y'all spend on your income statement when you're looking at your financials? As a percent of the total time you spend. We'll do that so it's less embarrassing. As a percent of the total time you spend on your financials, what percent are you spending on your P&L? 2/3. Somebody said 80? Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Most of y'all are spending between 80 and 90% of your time looking at your P&L, right? Because are we on track for revenue? Are we on track for profits? It's also an ego statement, right? Those are the numbers we brag about. Nobody's going to brag about their assets on the balance sheet. Now, if you are an auditor, guess how much time the auditor spends on the P&L? 0. Maybe a little bit more than 0, but you're real close. It's about 10%, right? There's another slide if you ever want to see the balance sheet slide. If your balance sheet is not correct, your P&L is not correct, right? It's just a universal truth. But today we're going to spend it on the income statement. Now, your income statement, it's primarily designed to tell you how fast you're going. That's really it. And what you might need to go faster. That's what your income statement is telling you, especially if you have an income statement that's compared to your budget, compared to last year. Are we going faster than last year or slower than last year? Where's the gas and how do I get more of it? Now, your balance sheet tells you how long you can maintain that pace in the race. So back in the day, I used to run marathons. I know that's inconceivable, looking at me right now. But we've all heard about people hitting the wall, right? Your balance sheet, when you run out of juice on your balance sheet, you will hit the wall. And I will guarantee you that everything else changes in your company because you're now hyper-focused about connecting the dots, moving the chairs around on the deck to make sure that you have enough cash to make payroll, get the landlord happy and everything else. That's a bad place to be. So hopefully someday we'll talk about your balance sheet, but today we're going to talk about just the income statement. Cash flow, it's a unique animal. It really tells you the why between, hey, I made, $1 million of income. Why do I not have $1 million more in cash? That's what the statement of cash flow does. It tells you where your balance sheet is eating your cash. So this is what I want you to visualize for your income statement. Does that look like your income statement? So for those of you that says, I look at my revenue and my EBITDA, you're eating the sandwich on the left. How many of y'all have ever bought a sandwich because of the 2 pieces of bread and nothing in between? You don't, right? Your income statement is really the sandwich on the right. It's all the stuff in between that makes your income statement meaningful, tasty, and everything else. And ultimately, you want to be able to see your income statement about how is the lettuce playing with the tomato, and do I have enough mayonnaise to maybe offset the cheese and everything else. It's really important to understand these things. Because when you understand these things, that's when you can get to accountability and then people knowing what number that they own and walking out of the room to make a change. Because if you ever in your own boardroom and everything else and people are looking at the numbers going, oh, okay, that's interesting, and they walk out without any idea about what they should be doing to change the numbers, you're not connecting the dots. You're not going to change people, behaviors, decisions, and processes because they're not aware about how they connect. When you start getting into this configuration of your income statement, they should be able to walk out and know what to do. So as we go forward, now does anybody have any questions about how your income statement looks right now before we get into how I think an income statement should look? Remember, you can get a free poker chip. Apparently that's not the...
We just don't focus on it. I think we're just, like you said, we're cash and cost. And sometimes we let the bank account drive your decisions.
Yep. And that's very typical. Yes, sir?
Because I knew this, this sort of question changed based on whether you're doing GAAP or a cash basis.
Oh, my gosh, that's such a great question. GAAP is everything. GAAP is harder to understand, but it is everything as far as really understanding your business. And how many in this room at least someday want to exit your business by selling it to somebody else? It's usually everybody. I will tell you, if you're not on GAAP accounting, you will probably be eviscerated in the closing room and in the due diligence. Because they're going to find out stuff that you don't even know about, don't have visibility to, and it's never going to go in your favor. So the best time to start doing GAAP before you sell your business, it's kind of like that adage about when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second time to best time to plant a tree? Today. So if you're not on GAAP, I'd do it today because cash is never going to tell you about the nuances going on in your business. So, again, this is what the balance sheet, the guy on the right, or the guy on the left has completely run out. He's lost all his goo packages, and he's no longer able to maintain that pace. So when you have disruptions in your business, financial disruptions, I want you to start having people explain the balance sheet to you. Why are we comfortable with it? Because the balance sheet is the gas that goes into the car, that is your P&L, that allows it to go as fast as you want it to. Now, the person on the right, he's at mile 20, he's all gooed up, he has plenty of fluids, everything's working great. He's probably actually enjoying a race, truly. So, sorry. This, guess what this is a picture of? This is a picture of your financial statements, right? Now, obviously, it's an iceberg, but what's the universal truth of an iceberg? Bigger at the bottom. How much is sticking out of the top? Right? Sorry? Just a little bit. It's around 10%, right? Now, your financial statements should work the same way. Your financial statements are only that 10% that's visible. And there's a boatload of data down below the water. Now, your financial statements, especially your income statement, they should be organized in such a way to where if you looked at them, that 10% is meaningful for everything else. In fact, how many of you would have time to go swim around the entire iceberg to understand your business? Well, that would be that stack of paper that somebody dumped on you. Not many of y'all have that time. So knowing this, it's really important of, does my balance sheet and income statement really tell me where I have problems or outrageous opportunities within my company? And if so, it should point you to where those opportunities might be. So you don't have to go look at everything. It should say, this is going really good. That's broken. Go look over here. There's a different way of also looking at your financials. When you look at your financials, always ask yourself, what decisions do I need to make? What is this telling me about the decisions that are either late or pending or whatever else? So as you start to get this mindset, your financial statement should start to get organized like a decision tree. If this is going off, then it has to be this or that, and then one layer below that. And it keeps on cascading down as far as what is the cause of this number? What decisions and activities are really driving this number? And hopefully you can see a lot of those on the face of your income statement. So as you start to visualize your financials as a decision tree, it should help you and your team to understand what decisions have to be made. What decisions are broken? Does that make sense to anybody? How many of y'all are kind of get that vig when you're looking at your financials, that you kind of understand, okay, this is off. I know what to do about it. Other than revenue, most entrepreneurs are pretty clued in about what to do about revenue, right? So as you look at this and we go forward, we're going to start out with just an example on revenue. And I will tell you, if you have just one line on your income statement that says revenue, you need to start right there. Because the composition of your revenue is everything. It's everything as far as what it's telling you about your business. It's everything as far as what it's telling you about the value of your business. So the streams of revenue are radically different. Radically different. The analogy that I usually use on this thing is, let's say that you have two businesses or two streams of revenue. One is a handful of diamonds. The other is a gargantuan pile of gravel. Now, which one of those revenue streams do you want? And why? This is the uncomfortable silence where people actually respond, but that's okay.
I'd say both.
Both. Why is that?
Well, you probably can sell the gravel more consistently, and it's your steady kind of keep you going. And then the diamonds might be your bigger money makers, but they aren't as consistent.
That is a great answer. That's probably one of the best answers I've ever had. There's other things that also drive the qualitative nature of that deal. Now, if I have diamonds, I either need a lockbox or a really great safe. If I have gravel, I need a huge yard and tons of equipment. So this one's very expensive, and I better be moving it a lot to pay for all that stuff. So if we stay on that example, if we stay on your analogy, and that was truly a great answer. So if you walk into a jewelry store, how often do they turn over their inventory? Because you're dead on. It's not very often. In fact, if you ask a jeweler, the things that bring people in are the watches. Because they rotate watches pretty fast, and people will buy jewelry going, oh, well, I'm here waiting on my watch. I'll take a look at that. Oh, that's beautiful. The gravel, on the other hand, it has to be moving all the time. And it's kind of like, the fruit and vegetables in a grocery store. Those turn over. They have really low margin, but they turn over 2 or 3 times a day. It's the velocity of margins that add value. And they know how many times that has to turn over. The diamonds, maybe 4 times a year. Maybe 4 times a year. But the margins are so big that it doesn't matter. So when you start looking at your revenues, you can ask yourself different questions. What's the speed that that revenue turns over relative to the margin? So as we peel into what our income statement is telling us, let's just look at qualitative natures of revenue. And hopefully some of these lines actually appear on your income statement. Over to the far left, we have very valuable revenues, right? They're low risk and high value. They're high value because they are low risk. They will recur, which means there's a lower risk that things get sideways. That's why everybody likes subscription-based revenues, recurring revenues, SaaS revenues, all that other stuff, because they recur automatically. At one point in time, I owned a construction company, and a construction company owns really low value revenues because you literally have to recreate your revenues every year. So as we go across here from recurring revenues, contracted services, subscriptions, maintenance agreements, all those are very valuable. And in fact, they're several times more valuable to a buyer than your other revenues. If you go from the extremes of maybe subscription services down to my project revenues, it could be a 5-fold difference in what those same revenues are worth to a potential buyer. Now, as we go across, and hopefully if you have these types of revenue streams, you want to see them on the face of your income statement because it'll tell you a ton about what you're investing in to drive your company and which ones are really adding value to your company. As we go across, there's reoccurring revenues. So for one company that we worked with, back in the day, they built out cell towers. Well, each cell tower was an individual project, but there was hundreds, if not thousands, of cell towers to be built. So it's reoccurring revenue, not recurring revenue. So that's really good as long as you're in those contracts. And then the further you get over into the project revenue, and the least valuable revenue in the world that you will ever have is concentrated revenue. Like if you have a customer that's over 25% of your revenue stream, value of your business just got cut in half. Maybe more. If it's over 50%, man, you have a great job, but you may not have a sellable company. So monitoring what's going on with that biggest customer and what you're doing to not shrink their size, but increase everybody else's size, does magical things. So you might actually have a line on there that says Walmart. And if Walmart's doing 80% of your revenues, you have a big Walmart problem on the face of your income statement that you should have plans around to grow all those other revenues. And you want to see readily, is my revenue growing because I'm doing more business with Walmart? Or is my revenue growing because I'm doing more business with the people that I need to increase my pool with? Hopefully that makes sense. And as we go back to the example about margins, these typically have really high margins because they don't cost a lot to implement. On my project-based revenues, man, I had a whole bunch of equipment, people, and everything else that I had to buy every time to do that. And whether or not I could get it negotiated well, every contract was a different deal. When I get to concentration, I probably have no negotiating power. We were doing this presentation with a guy out in Florida, and he came to us like, yeah, I got a real problem. My largest customer is 85% of my revenue. And that largest customer was killing him. But he couldn't say no to anything because it would immediately put him out of business. But that guy was squeezing him on margins and pricing every day because he transitioned to this business and let that concentration get away. Because he thought more revenue was good revenue, and that's not the case. The wrong revenue will put you out of business faster than almost anything else, almost overnight. So here's some things that you could look at to know, okay, is my business okay? What's going on with my income statement? What is it telling me? Let me get to the rest of these things, so we'll go through them. I think I have one more. Okay. So here's some things that are critical about what your income statement, what the lettuce is telling you about the tomato and all that other stuff. Number one, how many of y'all on a percentage basis have wildly volatile gross margins? And hopefully that percent is on the face of your income statement. Okay, one of y'all. Here's what wildly volatile gross margins usually tell somebody else about your company. And there's more than just these 3 examples, but these are the 3 most frequent. A, I don't know how to price my services and products, right? It's a hit or miss. Sometimes I'm winning, sometimes I'm not. I miss the scope. I'm not doing the things I need to do to be diligent in how I price out my services. Number 2, I'm really not good at executing. Volatile margins are a key indicator that you have executional problems. And number 3, and this one happens a lot, accounting is way out of alignment with my operations. Way out of alignment. It could also happen on cash, right? Because cash is never going to be in alignment with your operations, which is the beauty of accrual. When you go to accrual, these things start dancing as partners together. And you know, if they start getting volatile, the accounting shop and your operations shop are just not talking or working together. Volatile EBITDA, good months and bad months. You have problems with your cost controls, right? Or you have problems with your accrual accounting. Again, something bad is going on. We missed 3 months of this rent payment or whatever, and boom, it all shows up in 1 month. What that is also giving you is false negatives and false positives as you're looking at your income statement, right? Well, that expense shouldn't have hit all in 1 month. It should have been even out of all those other 3 months. So good accounting and this type of thing, if you haven't just lost control of your cost, then good accounting lets you know and rely on the numbers. It's not a false positive or a false negative. It's a real deal that needs to be addressed. In fact, some of y'all may have seen this. The worst thing an accountant can do for you is rush into the boardroom and start presenting the numbers that they haven't reviewed themselves. Because inevitably, somebody's going to ask them a question about something on the balance sheet or income statement, go, what's that and what caused it? And when the answer is, I don't know, oh gosh, I didn't see that, the credibility of the accountant just went way down. Everybody in the room has a propensity to want to discount the accountant because they don't like the news, right? Below average industry EBITDA. How many of y'all know your average industry EBITDA for your industry? You're an association, so you probably get good information about what everybody else is doing. So free offer, right? Not a solicitation, but if anybody wants a benchmark in your industry, just shoot me an email. I'll get it to you for free. And when you get the benchmark report, just know that when it looks at EBITDA, it's average. It's not stellar, it's average. So we have another saying that we like to do, that your numbers, they should always create an appropriate level of anxiety to take action. So when I give you your benchmark report and you see that you're either average or below average, I want you to ask yourself, did you invest the biggest part of your network to something that's creating average? Anyone? No, I didn't think so. I never get up, oh hell yeah, I love average. What it's also telling you though is your product or service is either below average or executed below average. Your leadership team is either average or below average. The staff that you hired is either average or below average. Or, and this is really the number one deal because I just beat up everybody in your company, your processes are average or well below average, and it's really affecting your business. That is truly the beauty of a benchmark report, right? It tells you where the bar is, and then you can ask critical questions about why. Revenue concentration, we've already talked about that. Anybody familiar with break-even point? Break-even point is one of my 3 top favorite metrics because it's the income statement, all convoluted. So your break-even point really tells you, based upon your margins and all your operating expense, how much revenue you need every month to break even or better. So what it does is, if you played with it, the lower your margins go, oh my gosh, your revenue goes way up, right? So what is that telling you? My margins go down and I have to sell 50% more, the risk of getting that done is much higher, right? As my margins go up, I need to sell less and the risk of getting that done goes lower. So it's a great risk indicator. It's also a great tool to use with your salespeople. Loic, I'm going to pick on you. Loic is suddenly my sales manager, and my break-even point is $1 million. And I'd go to Loic and it's like, Loic, I want to see in the pipeline of deals that we have enough stuff in the pipeline that's likely to close that we never go below $1 million 90 days out. And I'll always ask him for 90 days out. Because as long as he's always going above my break-even point and can solve that 90 days out, I'll never have a month of loss. Right? And if he's not sure, it's like, okay, well, what are we doing to get sure? The same math could be used, but Loic, not $1 million, I need $1.5 million to make sure that we are at 12% operating income. What are you doing in your backlog and your salespeople to make sure that we're at $1.5 million every month? Because now I've changed the conversation and do forward-looking stuff that I know will drive my profitability. And now he has a hard hurdle that he knows, okay, if I want to make that, I need to be jumping over that hurdle. Revenue per head. This is my second favorite one. You want to see the universal truth where people get in trouble? It's hiring based on the euphoria of possible revenues before they come in, right? And if you ever want to know what a good revenue per head is for your company, go back and look at 2 quarters where you were just killing it, like you were printing money. That's your ideal revenue per head, somewhere in that deal. You don't have to do a big study. You already have the data. So here's how I want you to use revenue per head. Loic, you're my avatar again. Yep, Carrie, I'm going to use you. Okay, Carrie comes in and says, Bert, we have some problems over in operations and I need to hire 3 people. That's fantastic, Carrie. We always like to grow. Carrie, our revenue per head is $25,000. So how long is it going to take before I see $75,000 more a month in my revenue to keep my stats the same or equal? Because if she can't answer that, it's like, okay, maybe we don't understand the problem or opportunity well enough to hire those people. What it'll also tell you, she's like, oh, I have all kinds of problems. We need people to clean up the problems. What she's also telling me is she's throwing bodies at the problem without solving the problem. No offense, Carrie. So she's throwing bodies at the issues that the problems are creating, but she's not finding out what the root problem is. So if we can't answer that question, then we need to go back and say, what's really our problem and how do we solve it? Okay, moving right along. Oh, mixed changes in your revenues. Okay, so here's the fun part. We're going to do this pretty quick, but I want you to go back and think about it's people, decisions, behaviors, processes, and systems, right? Because this is what it's telling us, and this is a very simple version. Now, over here, we're going to start out with revenue. We have standard and private label. We have growth indicators, which is where it's on variance. Standard's growing at 34%. Private label is growing at 104%. Okay, that sounds good. It depends, though. One of these has much higher margins than the other one. In fact, it is not the company branded product, it is the private label product that has more margin. So this is really good news for this company, that they are selling their high margin stuff at a wildly faster pace. So this would be great news. And then we see the mix over here is 75 and 27%. And if we're really investing in in this private label stuff, maybe our annual goal is 30% mix by the end of the year. So we're changing the fluidity, we're changing the composition of our revenue. We can see if we're progressing towards that deal on the face of the income statement, right? And there's probably different people that are accountable for those different channels within my salespeople. So not only can I see what's progressing, I can now go to the sales manager responsible for the standard and the sales manager responsible for the private label and ask them different questions. So I'm going to go down into COGS. So there's one other number that I want y'all to concentrate on, or at least lock and load on. My total revenue has grown by 47%. That's fantastic. I don't know about y'all, but it's really hard to grow 47% year over year. So that's fantastic. Now, as you look at this, we have comparative numbers, number one, right? We're comparing it to a prior period or possibly a budget. If you're not comparing your numbers, you're not getting a good indicator. You don't know what good really looks like or how much better. You always want comparative numbers. Number two, you always want that the common size. You always want the common size, and you always want this growth percentage. What is it changing? Because that change percentage, we're going to go in a second, really tells you everything about how the lettuce is talking to the mayonnaise, is talking to the cheese, right? So we have 47% growth in revenue. Direct labor, it's increased. We can see that. It's increased 48%. So just slightly more than our revenue, but not wildly. So it's moving in the same direction as our revenue, and that's exactly what you want. It's moving in the same direction. Maybe we're doing more overtime than we expected, but that's an acceptable deal relative to the volume. When we get down here, direct materials, it's actually growing slower than my revenue. That's fantastic. I can look at that and know that the person that's doing my procurement or how we're utilizing the materials is doing a great job. They've negotiated, in this case, better pricing on chicken. And it's starting to fall through. So I'm literally just picked up a full 1.5 of margin just because of how I'm buying out my products, right? So let's go down here to direct materials. This is packaging, all that stuff that goes around the things that they ship out. It grew by 79%. I just lost a boatload of margin. What's going on with my purchasing? Why is it so radically different than what we anticipated in our budget? Because it's killing the profitability of what we created over here, right? And then indirect, that's fuel, freight, and everything else. You can see that went up 35%. So we're still doing pretty good on that. Overall, gross profit increased 54% relative to our revenue. Now, this is the lettuce being compared to the tomato. The tomato being our revenue at 47%. Our margins are going at 54%. This is fantastic, fantastic, that my margins are growing at a pace that is significantly better than my revenue. We are making systemically better decisions and processes as we go through. So the ROI on that is great. One of the big reasons in a lot of manufacturing businesses, they'll put their equipment up here. This number doesn't change at all, right? They have the same equipment. They have the same building. That number doesn't change at all. That's called operating leverage. For those fixed costs that don't change and you can change your margins, money starts dropping to the bottom line because you don't have to invest at the same rate for those things. What's also interesting about this box that I have right here, I'm not going to go into contribution margin because y'all will fall asleep, and that's really not good for a presentation. Direct labor. Usually in my room is the plant manager. They own labor, right? Usually in the room is my procurement, in this company, the head of procurement, because they own all those products that we're bringing in. And then down here, I have somebody that's managing this. Both of these are procurement. Down here, I have somebody that's managing freight. So now I've arranged my income statement to align with accountability, right? And not only accountability for you own that number, you own its relationship to the other numbers. You're falling behind, you're ahead. I want you to come back at our next meeting with 3 things that you think need to get that number back in alignment with the others. And now I have a measuring stick of how much change it's going to take. Or can we offset it? Now, as we come down the income statement, you'll see that we do this with every one of our clients. We are always going to remap your chart of accounts into sales and marketing, employment expenses, administrative, and fixed. This is also for accountability. On sales and marketing, I want to ask my sales manager, why are we not more efficient? We're spending more on sales. Our sales and marketing is growing much faster than our revenue. When does that catch back up? I'm fine for investing in sales and marketing as long as there's a ROI on that. As far as G&A, we put all that together because that's your number one cost that most people change or can change readily. That's why I go back to revenue per head, because it is a universal balancing act. You can use revenue per head for a hiring tool and for when it's time to freeze or start moving people out of the company. But each one of these also has a different set of responsibilities. My sales manager, maybe my HR department managers, that might be accounting, or we're doing a lot of what I call Yahoo expenses, which are not productive. Fixed is down here at the bottom because you can't change it. If we need to change the company, I don't want you looking there because it's really expensive to go and change your fixed expenses. You're going to have to buy out your lease. You're going to change buildings. You can't do it readily. So this is all organized in order of accountability and cascading down from most changeable to least changeable. Now you can see over here that that these expenses, those have grown 41%, so it looks like we're still doing good. Now let's look down here at the operating profits. It went from a loss of $61,000 to net income of $590,000. Who's happy in the room? Okay. It's a hell of an improvement, right? It's a hell of an improvement. Let me just say that I just gave you your benchmark report. What number on here are you likely very unhappy about now? Two 2%. You're nowhere near good enough. This industry average is 8%. So they're at 25% of industry average. They're doing a heck of a lot better. But they have a lot more to go. And frequently people go, man, I changed my net income huge. I'm doing great. And it's like, you're doing much better, but you're still a ways away from great. So let's change the questions that we're asking ourselves so we can map this thing to how we change 2% to 8%. Here is a great way of doing that. Oh, somebody answered the 2%. I love the look on Louique's face. How many of y'all do this with your income statement? If you're getting ready to do annual planning, and we're kind of into the annual planning season, and your percent of profitability is not where you want it to be, I want you to do this. Turn your income statement upside down, right? And he says, folks, we're going to rework this entire income statement until we can make that number 8%. We may only make it 4.5%, 5% this next year, but we need to be on a concentrated path towards 8, if not 10 or 12%. Because we're investing to be above average, not mediocre, not sloppy, not horrible. We want to be above average. So tell me what we're going to do. And there's only one thing that is disallowed in this thing that you cannot talk about, and that's more volume. Don't talk about more volume. Don't let revenue be the panacea for these problems. Here's why. If you put more revenue and activity on a weak company, and 2% is a weak company, what's going on? Sorry? It remains weak. What else is going on? That's a great answer. Good job.
You're hiding the problems.
You're hiding the problems.
Adding more stress to them.
Oh, dude, you're my new best friend. You're exactly right. 2% is a key indicator that you have a weak foundation, operational foundation. If you put more weight on a weak foundation, what's going to happen? It's going to break. So first, solve the profitability problem for your current volume. If you do that, it's super powerful. Because everybody, I will tell you, if I talk to 10 entrepreneurs, 9.9 of them want to solve the problem with more revenue. And they've never fixed their structural issues. In fact, some of them, revenue can be a really slippery slope if you're stressed on capital. There's a company we dealt with a long time ago, and they weren't performing well, and they were really getting tight on cash. So what did the CEO do? Started negotiating with his customers about, hey, I need you to pay 50%, I need you to pay 100% or whatever up front, and then we're going to start your activities. I love that for cash flow. That is fantastic. What else is going on in that scenario?
Might lose some customers.
Might lose some customers. Yeah, I don't want to pay you for stuff you haven't done. But let's say I'm just having you pay for 50%. Not unusual. But over time, he was surviving on the 50% that he got, not on the 50% that he earned. So he was creating a whole bunch of deferred revenue. How many of y'all have a business where you have deferred revenue? Okay. You back there. What's your business? Sorry, I got you in mid-bite.
Marketing agency for nonprofits.
Oh, okay. Well, bless you for doing that. Here's the problem. Here's the problem with deferred revenue. When you have it, it's a liability, and it's a real liability. It's a hard, real liability. And if you're spending it faster than you're earning it, you're creating a Ponzi scheme. You have to go and sell more tomorrow to fund for the promises you made yesterday. So if I'm looking at your balance sheet, and I'm going to do a little balance sheet sidestep, a little dance here. I have time, so. And I look at your deferred revenue, here's what I'm going to do. Let's say that you have, I don't know, $500,000 in deferred revenue, and your margins are 50%. I'm going to go 50% times $500,000, $250,000. I need to see at least $250,000 of cash in your bank account, because that's how much you owe your customers. If you don't have it, you're borrowing from your future customers to pay for the work of your prior customers. If you were to sell your company and that was the deal, I would eviscerate you at the closing table. I mean, we're not going to probably get a deal because you don't know what's really going on with your company. In this one case, this guy had $2.5 million of deferred revenue. Guess how much cash he had? $200,000. Right. He's on this hamster trail for a long time. Deferred revenue and getting that cash up front, it'll feel good, but if you're not monitoring it relative to your cash balance, you don't know if you're on a slippery slope or not. Because I would take that cash balance, less that $250,000 for deferred revenue, and the remainder, I want to see if that's enough to run my company on. If it is, that's great. If it's not, I got a problem, and I need to make sure that I'm halting that problem. Some people, this guy is where he got in trouble, he started making hiring decisions based upon his cash balance. Oh, I love the sound effects here. That's why I say cash is a really bad leading indicator for making decisions. So this will drive wildly different conversations in your boardroom when you challenge. Yes, ma'am.
So how do you tie that out with significant investments in training or things that
Sure.
they need to happen to get you to that next level?
I love training. Love training. But there should be a reward for training. There should be an outcome for training. We should be more productive with training. If I train you well, does that mean that you're staying here longer? So maybe my turnover goes down, which is a very expensive deal. If you can tie training to lower turnover, I'm all in. If you can try training to more productivity, I'm all in. Even in my company, a new CFO comes in, we spend the first 4 months not training them, but mentoring them about how to be an emotionally in tune, consultative person with a CEO. Because most of them are black and white number people and very granular to talk to. So I love training as long as they're an impact. For us, the impact is these people have gotten connected to clients and their client turnover is very small. And then they're staying with our company a whole lot longer because it directly relates to them being able to feed themselves. In fact, since we started that, 2 of the CFOs that we've hired in the last 2 years have now replaced my number 1 CFO. And that number 1, man, it wasn't even close for the longest of time. Now I have 2 people that are outproducing my number 1, and I have a 3rd that's coming up. So the question is how does it relate a return? There's another thing that I'll do for salespeople. And it kind of relates to your question, so let me go off to a little path here. How many of y'all have salespeople? Or are you the salesperson? Right, all of us, or most of us, right? I do most of the sales stuff for my deal, which is probably why we're not growing nearly as fast as I want. But back in the day, I used to own a construction company. And somebody'd come in, and I might be trying to hire the salesperson. I go, Loic, I see that you've been in commercial flooring and contracting for a long time. This is going to be fantastic, Loic. I'm so excited that you're here. Loic, can you tell me what your sales, your cumulative sales would look like on a 3, 6, 9, 12, 15-month basis, right? I don't care about month to month, Loic, because we're always going to slip a month. Don't really care about that, but 3 months. Loic's going to give me some numbers for those 3 deals, and it's going to create this curve, right? That's my success curve with Loic. That's what I'm investing in. And I would then literally ask Loic questions like, man, that's fantastic. You and I are going to be best friends forever. But Loic, answer me this. What would be the same numbers on the same deals of 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 months that you would consider unacceptable to yourself? Because now Loic's going to plot that out, and now he's giving me his failure line, right? So I call that my cone of performance, right? I now can graph out this kind of performance. And I tell Louis, this is fantastic. You have a great reputation. I'm highly confident that we're going to get to the top line. And I don't expect you to be there immediately, right? Because there's learning curve, there's all this other stuff. And as long as you're progressing towards it, you and I are going to be singing Kumbaya around the fire a lot. But Loic, if you start nosediving towards that lower number, our conversations are going to change. We're going to get into why and what needs to change within you. And if those changes aren't good, we both agree that we're probably heading towards we need to part ways. My investment is not being realized. With a lot of salespeople, when we hire salespeople, there's always a reason why. And because we haven't defined success and failure in front of it, then we start making decisions. And we all love people. We all want to be good to our people. And we start rationalizing those decisions and prolonging the pain. You can do the same thing with your training. You can do the same thing with new markets. You can do the same thing with new business. What does success and failure look like? Now we can plot, are we on track or way off track?
Can I ask a quick question?
You can ask even a long question.
The cash and
Deferred?
deferred. Is there a circumstance where you would take up cash plus inventory or current assets versus deferred instead of just cash?
That is a really good question. It depends, right? It depends. I'll give you another metric. I'd hate inventory. I hate inventory. Inventory to me is a write-down waiting to happen, and I cannot stand it. In fact, I'll get back to inventory in just a second, but let's go back to the other things that you talked about. There's a metric that we call operating liquidity, OPLIC for short. If you Google it, it's going to take you to our website. Here's what OPLIC is. OPLIC is my cash balance plus 80% of my AR divided by my average monthly COGS and operating expense. And what does that tell me? It tells me how long I can operate my business on my most liquid assets. Like if hell freezes over tomorrow, I have 2 or 3 months that I can solve this problem before I freeze over, right? And for OPLIC, we usually want at least 2 months of operating liquidity, preferably 3. What it also is, it's a great cookie jar measure. Like, until you get above 3, don't take capital out of your company because you're going to starve the company. I do this in my own company. We'll have OPLIC. I want at least 2, 3. When it gets to 5, I'm going to take 2 or 3 months worth of liquidity out of the company as a distribution, but I've never starved the company for liquidity. But I do not include inventory in that. Because the reason I don't is because people that have large inventory usually have a large problem. It's a false positive. Large inventories, depending on your revenue levels, are telling you that your customers don't want what you have. They certainly don't want it at the price that you're offering it. Or your salespeople don't know how to penetrate that channel. Nor do I include the money that you have not yet borrowed from your bank, even though you have availability, because banks are notorious for pulling out the umbrella when it starts to rain, right? So I look at those 2 things. Hopefully that solved your deal and kind of addressed the inventory. Anything else? Okay. So here's another tool that y'all can have. And this is really getting into cash flow, but this is called the power of 1. And you'd input your balance sheet and income statement into this deal. It's very simple, very simple. And then the only numbers that you can play with are right here. And then that's the number that I usually disallow, right? Because it's too easy to solve it. But if you really want to focus on cash instead of net income, then it's like, okay, could we reduce our cost of sold by 1%? Can we negotiate better with our vendors and squeeze 1% out of it? Can we reduce our operating expense, solve those problems that are creating a lack of productivity? Maybe our revenue per head is going down, which is signaling that we're having productivity problems. Can I bring that back up and increase that by 2 or 3%? AR. AR can also be a false negative. 2 things on AR. AR is good, but if you look at really small changes on AR, you can see just on this company, it's only $82,000 there. So, but increasing AR, especially if you have AR that's over 35 days in total, it's a problem, right? That AR that's over 35 days, maybe over 40 days, should be cash in your bank. Should be cash in your bank. The other thing with AR, if you looked at your AR aging, which I encourage you to do, and those buckets started getting bigger out there, it's a sign of economic stress within your customer base, right? It's either a sign of that or it's a sign of somebody in your billing department has changed and it's getting jacked up, right? But if you look at this, you can go through it and find out that it's pretty simple. There's two on here that I always recommend as your starting points, and I'm doing a little balance sheet stuff on you, so you're going to have to bear with me. Number one, accounts payable. Stretch your payables. A lot of us go, I have the money, I'm going to pay. I have the money, I'm going to pay. I have the money, I'm going to pay. It's free financing. Here's the other reason why I say start with your payables, because you control it 100%. You don't have to ask anybody's permission. You don't have to go and tell your customer or explain to your customer what you're going to do. You don't have to get anybody to change other than your AP clerk. Pretty easy to do. You could implement this tomorrow, and by the end of 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to have more cash in the bank account, and I doubt that your vendors are going to be really upset unless you're already late and past due, right? But if you've been paying in terms or better for a long period of time, start moving out 5 days, 10 days, 15 days. You'll be surprised at how few of them are squeaking unless you're already past. That alone is going to save you a small fortune, especially if you're in manufacturing, construction, things that are buying real cost of goods. The other one that I go to is right here, price increase. How many of y'all have done a price increase in the last year? Okay. Last 2 years? Okay. For those that didn't raise your hand, why not? Too often, we live in fear of our own pricing, right? And we lose track about what's really going on in the marketplace. So I'm going to show you a tool here. It's free. Give me a holler. You can have it anytime, but we're going to explain it right now. We're going to explain it right now. Oh. Okay. We're not explaining it right now. We're going through the rest of my slides. Okay. This is just a quick decision matrix for whether you should increase prices or not, okay? So, across the top, it's my gross margins that I currently have. This company has a 40% gross margin. Over here is the level of price increases that I'm anticipating. I'm looking at a 5% increase. Where these two boxes merge, it's telling me, hey, if I have 40% margins and I want to increase 5%, I could lose 11% of my customers and still be okay. If I have 40% and raise it 10%, I could lose 20% of my customers and be okay. Mostly people go, oh, there's no way I'll lose that many for just 5%, so you're good to go. But even if you lose some of those 5%, what customers are you losing? The bad ones, right. The pain in the necks, the people that drive you crazy. The people are always asking for discounts and extra things and, special considerations from your people. That might be a good 5% to lose. But use this with your people and ask the question, ask your salesperson, are we really going to lose more than 20% of our folks? Because you'll find out that doing less activity for the same profitability lowers the risk of your company and increases the likelihood that you succeed.
It could increase your client concentration.
That's a great caveat. That's a fantastic caveat. If that's the case, then you need to double check that, right? So, questions, comments?
I mean, also on that last part, how is that taking effect of what you may want to do that based on a competitive landscape that restricts what you can do versus what you want to do, or you're going to say that then the industry is operating more efficiently.
It is important to know those benchmarks because if you're really under the margins or under EBITDA, then it does mean that you have a problem that your competitors don't. If you're doing better than that, your customers are probably happier with you. Most customers don't want to make a change over a small pricing increase. And if you ever increased prices in the last couple of years, boy, did you miss a huge opportunity. Because the inflation word has been thrown around like candy at Halloween. So it's an ideal time to be doing it because truly, just ask yourselves, when was the last time that you didn't give your people a raise? If you want to keep good people, you have to raise their compensation, which means you internally have inflation going on. If it's not offset by productivity, you have to raise your prices. Or else you're squeezing yourself, which is going to squeeze your ability to perform long term. But you're right. I would do this maybe if I had different channels. I'd do this for each channel because that dynamic's going to be different. So it's not just a blanket thing, but it's a really good way of saying, would it be that much? No. Go ahead. Any other questions about what we've covered today? What makes sense? What sounds like total BS? I usually get a lot of BS things, so that's okay.
Do you have a favorite tool for kind of building, tracking this over time? I think the challenge I've had was, I know where all the numbers are in QuickBooks, I can pull them, I can get there. I generally know what they mean, but I haven't found a good way to, consistently track them over time in an easy way, like Excel's not the right way, right?
Now,
Basically a financial dashboard.
yeah, so there's a couple. QuickBooks is okay. I mean, it's good for accountants, but most entrepreneurs are visual or tactile learners, which means the spreadsheet doesn't say jack squat to them. Graphs, trends, KPIs are super meaningful. We have a tool, and I'll tell you what it is. It's called Fathom HQ. If you're using QuickBooks, it'll plug into there. Every one of our clients is on, we have Fathom. It's super robust. I can do all kinds of KPIs, graphs, trends, all kinds of stuff. Alerts and targets. In fact, we used to have our own dashboard. It cost me a fortune to maintain until we found Fathom. We pushed our entire analytical engine and reporting engine into Fathom. Starting, you can go on YouTube and get some good videos about that. There's another one called For Impact Data, which includes some AI tools. And it's kind of cool because when you hit the alerts, it'll send you, hey, this thing went off track. Here's 3 things that you need to consider doing. And if we ever went through trends and everything else, I would show you that if you trend 2 things like your revenue and your DSO, Days Sales Outstanding, you want to see a consistent pattern between those numbers. And when that pattern breaks, you have a process problem. Something just happened with your people, process, or systems. Ask that 3 questions, and you're going to find the root cause real fast. Yes, sir.
I know we're just about at time, but considering that it's a room full of entrepreneurs and they have attention spans about this big, you went through a lot today. What you went through today, or just generally from your expertise in the field, everybody leaves today, one thing, what would you tell them they should do with their finances?
Turn your income statement upside down. If you're not at least 10% EBITDA, you need to figure a way on your current operations to get there. Was that quick enough?
Hey, I love it.
Yes, sir.
Do you see anybody use zero-based budgeting in small company world?
Almost never.
Almost never.
Almost never. Challenging people on revenue per head when you're looking at budgeting is a good governor on everything. We had one client, it's like, I'm going to hire 10 people because it's easier. I can train them all at once, all these salespeople. And I was like, oh my God. You are going to drown in your ability to train them, and you're just adding tons of overhead. You're probably going to have a loss for at least 6 months getting these people trained up. They went down that path for about 3 months and got rid of most of them or stopped the hiring. Yeah, exactly. What else? Any questions? Okay. You could call this Stump the Chump if you want to, but.
So I like you gave, just thinking about entrepreneurs, sometimes having to, that's a level of whether it's pull money out of the company or not. And so you gave that one.
Oplic.
The Oplic. Are there any other benchmarks or checkpoints that you recommend they do that before pulling money out?
Before pulling capital out, that's probably number one, and it's real easy to understand. You'd want to, I'm getting kind of esoteric here, looking at your debt to equity is another one, because your banker is going to be real interested in that. There's certain parameters that your banker wants so much equity relative to their loan in your company, or else they're going to freak out. And if I know your type of business, I can give you a better understanding. Anything else before we wrap up? I'll send the deck over to John. He can do whatever he wants with it. And a couple of the tools, I'll send those out with an explanatory memo. But thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate the fact that nobody fell asleep. This is great.